Hi everyone, Forris Day Jr. here with Rolling Tape. Today we have Robert Denton Bryant. He's the co-author of the book Slay the Dragon, Writing Great Video Games. Now, let's roll tape.
This episode brought to you by Spoof Dance Film Festival. Make parody commercials and bring the funny.
Welcome to the show, Robert.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to your viewers because Keith and I wrote Slay the Dragon, Writing Great Video Games, because there were plenty of books out there that were for game developers and programmers and game designers to teach them about story. He and I, being writers first and foremost, wanted to write a book that was a great introduction for writers who were thinking about getting involved in the medium of video games. You very often get into arguments with hardcore games players about, well, games don't need stories. And of course, you can think of games like Words with Friends that don't need stories per se. But what Keith and I make the assertion in the book is that good games need good stories. And part of the reason we wrote the book is we want writers, people who are really conversant in storytelling and world building, to become much more familiar, much more comfortable, lower those barriers to entry to moving into the interactive medium, because it will help grow and mature and give us really interesting new things to do in the interactive medium. But it doesn't start with the story first. And the other humbling thing is that you are no longer, once you move into games, you're no longer into Aristotelian one way, I'm telling you a linear story. The player is the co-author of his or her experience with your story. Does that make sense?
Yes, and you made a good point. If I can touch on this point, you and I were talking about Pac-Man, which is a game that I love, and I never really thought about it having a story, but you made a good point that when you eat one of the power-up pills on Pac-Man, the story changes. You become, instead of the hunter, you are now the prey.
It's a reversal. Yes.
A reversal. So I thought that was interesting. Never thought about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can sit there and accrue narrative. You can put narrative on top of anything. But the more conversant you are in narrative, the more naturally a storyteller you are, the richer the game experience is going to be. So what like I say, we wrote the book because we want to attract writers to the medium, but there's some very basic fundamental things you need to understand as a writer moving into interactive. First of all, it's not story first. Secondly, you are sharing authorship of the experience with the player. We call that sort of tension because we're storytellers. We want to tell stories. We want attention to the story. Well, the player's there not to hear a story strictly. They're here to have an experience. They're here to have an experience that they make a lot of choices in creating, right? And so we call that dichotomy in the book, we call that the Mario versus Aristotle problem, right? They're always fighting for attention. Aristotle, the storyteller, and Mario, the player. They're always fighting for the attention, immediate attention of the player. And one of the challenges of a game writer, or as they're often called in the business, the narrative designer, you like that? Is that is how do you integrate the story into the gameplay instead of going with, if you've ever played any game in the last 20 years, 20 or 30 years, you're used to the kind of the pools and rivers model where you've got a pool of gameplay, then a little cutscene that takes you back on a linear story, and then you're back in a pool where you can play gameplay throughout a level and have a lot of freedom and player choice, and it feels like a game. Then you're locked into a non-linear mini movie for the next level and that sort of thing. And that works, and it has worked for 20 years. But the real challenge for us as storytellers in the game space is to integrate. How can I keep the player engaged in the story without taking away the gameplay and locking them down and making them watch a movie. Do you see what I mean? And that's it's a real challenge. We're getting better and better at it, and as we get more and more sophisticated, accomplished writers, teaching them the tools of interactive, I'm hoping we're going to get even better in terms of integrated storytelling and really making richer narrative and emotionally meaningful experiences for the player. We talk about this in the book. Video games have always been journeys of action. Our challenge is to make them journeys of emotion, right? And that's tough to do. You have to, as a writer, you have to work with the game designers, that is the people that decide what I'm going to do in the game, what the player is able to do, right? Game design, game mechanics, you hear that word, is basically the verbs, right? What do I get to do in the game? Do I get to jump? Do I get to shoot? Do I get to make economic choices? Do I get to command armies? Do I get to dance? Do I get to play plastic guitars? Whatever it is. Those game mechanics, think of them as the verbs, and game designers are constantly working with how do you make that fun? How do you create the fun? Because games need to be fun. The narrative designer works next to the game designer to help contextualize that fun, making it meaningful, make it resonant, and create the content that is fun to experience through the game mechanic, right? So what you as a writer, if you've been writing at all, or if you've taken any writing classes, you're really familiar with the term character arc, right? My character needs to change through the events of the story. By moving through the plot, I become less callow and more worldly. I'm Luke Skywalker. I start off in the first act kind of whiny, and through loss and seeing my mentor die and all like that, by the end of the show, I am more confident. I'm turning off my targeting computer, and what do you know? I killed the Death Star. Awesome. So that character arc we're familiar with as writers. There's two other arcs you need to deal with when you anticipate writing a video game. One of those arcs is the ability arc. And because the abilities you have at the beginning of the game are very, very thin. It's baby steps compared to the player expectation that I'm going to master these abilities, I'm going to get better and better and better, but I also want more things to do. I want to master different abilities. I want to add mechanics as we go along so the game never gets stale, and so I don't feel like what I'm doing is repetitive, right? So there's an ability arc you have to manage and co-manage with the game designers. And then there's a third arc. And what do you think that is? It's the challenge arc. Because if I get to jump higher and higher, then I need hurdles that are higher and higher for me to jump over, right? So you're really managing three arcs when you're creating a video game. And so you need to expand your thinking beyond just what's going to happen to my hero emotionally. How is he going to be affected by what's happening in the story? You need to also reflect that in what's happening with the game mechanics. What can the player character do differently? How has their power set, how have their abilities changed? Sometimes they grow, sometimes they should diminish.
Right.
And how does the content, how the player reacts to the world, how does that change in order to align favorably, still be challenging relative to what they're doing in the game?
Right. Where can people get the book?
The book is available worldwide on online, your favorite online booksellers. It's also available at most major retailers, and it's always available on the publisher website, which is MWPMichaelWeeseyProductions.com, MWP.com.
And do you allow folks to contact you directly? And if you do, how can they do that?
Oh yeah, Keith and I share a Twitter account for the book. It's at Game Writing Book.
At Game Writing Book. Okay.
At Game Writing Book.
All right, Robert, thank you for joining me on this episode of Rolling Tape. Our 10 minutes has passed, and totally appreciate you joining me.
It was a pleasure for me, and I hope we can do this again.
Yes, I look forward to having you on again, and we will have you on again. Thanks for watching.
Cheers. Bye-bye.